and what I say about CMM all brings to one thing, that is therapy as an encounter between people that come from different perspectives, make sense from their own perspective, and while communicating, they share, they negotiate a new meaning, which is the meaning that will then make context for future communications. This to me is very important, because then when I do therapy, it's not what I say, it's not what they say, but it's what we are doing together in terms of negotiating meanings.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Laura Fruggeri as we take a communication perspective on communication, interactions, and systems. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Laura Fruggeri. Laura is director of the Bologna Family Therapy Center, where she works as teacher, researcher, and psychotherapist. She's a consultant and supervisor of teams working in the mental health services. She's written numerous articles, essays, and books in a variety of languages. She was a good friend of Barnett Pierce and continues to practice CMM in new and exciting ways in her practice as a psychotherapist. What I really like about this conversation is the way that Laura offers us a couple different stories that really situate CMM and the tools that it offers as a truly transformative practice by juxtaposing it to what was being done before, how specifically for Laura, in her context, therapists were approaching conversations, and then that, kind of bleeds into other areas of our lives that you as the listener can extrapolate and make meaning of for your own context, whether you're a therapist or not as well. As always, there's so much richness in this conversation, so I invite you to now, at this time, join me and Laura as we talk about communication, interactions, and systems. Hello, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me for the podcast. I'm so looking forward to speaking with you today.
Thank you. Hello, Abbie. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. As always, we're kicking it off with the question of how are we arriving? For me, this is about giving some context, saying that yes, we only have an hour together and we are complex and full human beings outside of this hour. And this is our opportunity to maybe give people a glimpse into that of what our context is as we enter this hour. What I would like to share in terms of how I'm arriving is, one, so excited to learn from you and hear about your experiences, specifically as a systemic practitioner, because the world of systems and systems thinking is something that I'm very recently beginning to learn about and see as a real partner or parallel or something that CMM and a communication perspective fits into really nicely. They really work hand in hand with each other. And I'm in this role in the CMM Institute, beginning to interact with so many new people from so many different fields. So my mind has really been in a place of seeing how a communication perspective is relevant, which I think objectively it is everywhere that we're human people are communicating. But how can I kind of help people understand what a communication perspective can offer in all of these different fields? And so I'm very much in a mindset of kind of like CMM and world right now of what does CMM add to this, or what does a communication perspective teach us or help us with in these other fields? And so that's something that I think we have a lot to talk about, because I see that your work exists at the intersection of multiple fields as well, and brings together a lot of really important kind of competencies. So that's part of how I'm arriving today. Laura, how are you arriving?
Okay, I think first of all, as a friend of Barnett Pierce, we knew each other, worked together, collaborated, kept, in touch for all the years we knew each other. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about how CMM, and not only that, of course, but how CMM has also contributed to my profession, to how I've been a teacher, a therapist, and so this is how I arrive. And maybe then we'll be able to share some ideas and the ways we arrive seem to be a good context for this
Mm-hmm.
conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've come to understand the way we arrive is very important in terms of the lens that we're bringing with us. And the recent podcast I did was with Rachel Lilly, who talks about human sense making and is very much in the systems thinking world. And it was just such an interesting conversation to talk about the expectations and the way our brains work to predict what's happening. And that's the place that we're acting from so much. And so I love the practice that she and I had talked about, which a communication perspective and social construction is very much a part of learning to slow down and become mindful of what's being created and explore that space a little more of those other options. So that's that's a bonus of how I'm arriving, something I'm
For
bringing.
me, it's more within a relationship.
Yes, yes.
The idea of CMM, the social construction, it's are ideas that are good in order to be in a good relationship with people. And this is, of course, very important for me,
Mhm.
being a psychotherapist.
Yes, yes. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited to hear more about that. But before we get too deep into the content,
Yeah.
Laura, I want to make sure we have a chance to get to know you a little more. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what are some of the experiences that led you to be where you are today?
I'm a psychotherapist, as I said. I've been a university professor until some years ago when I retired. And since then, I have taken the direction of an institute, the Family Therapy Institute, where we do both therapy and training. So we train people that will be psychotherapists.
Mhm.
And I've been a university professor for many, many years. And I used to teach social psychology, family psychology, family communication. And, but at the same time, I've always dedicated at least one day a week to psychotherapy. Because actually, I started as a psychotherapist after my graduation. I specialized in psychotherapy at the Milan Center, the famous Milan
Mhm.
Center. My teachers, my masters were Luigi Boscolo and Gianfranco Cecchin. And it was from all of this, university professor, researcher, psychotherapist, that I've always been all through these years. It was in this context that I met Barnett Pierce and Vernon Cronin, because many years ago, I was visiting professor at the University of New Hampshire, working then with John Lennon and
Mhm.
Sheila McNamee. And through them, of course, I also met Barnett and Vern. And then Barnett, I invited him to come for a conference. And we started then, back and forth. We were together teaching in Oxford to a group of family therapists. So we had so many occasions of, exchanging. That is why I say I'm here. I arrive here as a friend of
Yeah.
Barnett. I'm very happy to be able to talk of how important, also his ideas have been in my profession.
Mm.
So as I said, I always think I have multiple personalities, in a way, that because I've been a researcher, I've been a professor, I've been a psychotherapist all my life after graduation. And interesting, I think, is that I was trained as a family therapist, as a systemic family therapist,
Mhm.
but before we ever started to talk about social constructionism. I mean, I'm old, so I did my training uh, in the perspective of paradox and counterparadox
Mm.
by the Milan group, which was a strategic approach, after all. I mean, if we have really to synthesize, it was a strategic approach based on communication, based on the analysis of communication in a pragmatic perspective.
Mm.
So, the idea of therapy was an application of techniques. The idea of therapist was the therapist was the director of the
Mm.
situation, very interventive and able to read what was happening within the family. So it was a very, as I say, kind of a frontal perspective,
Mm.
therapist in front of the family,
Yeah.
understanding, intervening, explaining, and everything.
Mm.
So it was to me, a development into a different approach.
Mhm.
Um, and it was mainly, I think, because I became more and more interested in understanding not what was the result of the therapy, but
Mm.
what was the process
Yeah.
of the therapy. So, what was going on between the therapist and the client and the family, usually in my
Mhm.
case? What was going on? What was that helped people change? You know,
Mhm.
because I started then to think that there was more than just a technique,
Mhm.
than just the technique I had learned. There was something that we were doing together that was, I think, the focus of therapy. And I was, in a way, lucky to live a very exciting period, the beginning of the 90s, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, when, at least in Italy, a lot of researchers and scholars from different perspectives, biology and philosophy and even engineering
Mhm.
and so on, they came to get physics. They came together and then to reflect about the complexity
Mhm. Mhm.
of the world. So they offered a completely different way of looking at things, a completely different way of what is scientific, a completely different way. The big change was that, the researcher, so the therapist, so the teacher, so whatever, is an observer and participate in the construction of what she is observing. this to me was the big change.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I, went through this period that was framed as the challenge of complexity.
Mm.
There was a book with this title that was edited, published in Italy, with the participation of Nobel Prizes and important, scholars from all these different disciplines thinking about what the idea of complexity and what the idea of us as part of the process we were observing would affect, our way of doing our profession. That to me was exciting. And that to me was the moment where, I really changed the perspective about my work, about clients, about how then we should have practice, psychotherapy.
Wow, that is such a great place to start. And I want to name that we're at a bifurcation point right now because you've shared so many things that I have so many questions about. So I feel like I have a lot of choices right now about what to pick out and where to start our conversation. But I'm going to let go of all those other options and just commit to one in the interest of being present. And where I actually want to start is to ask you to actually say a little more about what the Milan Center is and what was so exciting about the work that was being done there, just for listeners who aren't familiar with that at all.
Yeah. Well, the Milan Center is an institute, was an institute that was founded by Mara Salvini Palazzoli, and who invited other colleagues to work with her, and especially Giuliana Prata, Luigi Boscolo, and Gianfranco Cecchin. And the four of them published this very important book that was Paradox and Counterparadox. That was a proposal of a methodology, a practice, a psychotherapeutic practice based on communication, as I said, but also in this strategic attitude, let's say, perspective. It was very important because it became very famous all over the world. And but the interesting thing is that I did my training in between the publication of the book, Paradox and Counterparadox, and the publication of an article that had been very famous, that is hypothesizing circularity and neutrality, the 3 guidelines for psychotherapy. And the difference was that the book was, as I said, into a strategic perspective, with the idea of therapist as the director, of the whole situation. Instead, the article, was introducing the idea that it was more the conversation that therapists and the clients had to be the focus of the process of change. So I did my training starting from one perspective and ending into a more complex kind of perspective, which was the perspective that, in fact, Gianfranco Cecchin and Luigi Boscolo then developed, and teaching all over the world. They spread the model of the so-called Milan model that was based very much on the conversation that therapists would carry on with clients, with the idea that the way they were communicating with clients was the channel to introduce different perspectives, help the clients to see their situation, their stories from a different perspective as a base for a change that was not the therapist that was, operating the change, but it was more the family that, thanks to the conversation with the therapist, would bring about change. So this was a very important perspective that was introduced in the systemic family therapy, because then a lot of people started to work and do research on the right questions to ask, the question that would allow people to take a different perspective, question that would more easily introduce a difference in the way people were telling their stories.
Do you have an example or story that you could reference that helps demonstrate that? Maybe one from that like before and one from the after, of what was the difference between what those conversations looked like or felt like for you?
The difference was that in the first perspective, therapists would collect information to make an idea of how family function, and then make an intervention that would probably bring about change. A counterparadox, rituals, reframing, or this kind of intervention that are typical of the strategic approach. In the other perspective, it was more the idea that it was how you talked to the family that was the movement for change. So it was not collect the information and then do your intervention, and the intervention will change. It was more talk about their stories in a way that the conversation in itself would introduce different perspective, different viewpoints, different ways of seeing things. So, for example, ask questions that introduce circularity. That was very important, because if you ask circular questions, you start describing things in a relational way. So, and it is by, introducing a way of descriptions that were not individual anymore, but were more systemic, more relational, that also the family would start seeing things in a different way. And from this new perspective, being able to change something in their life. Is it clear to you?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is clear. And I'm so interested in your perspective, especially as a researcher and a practitioner, of the intersection or the relationship between theory and practice of CMM, of social construction, because like you said at the very top of this conversation, and I completely agree, that for me, CMM is like an orientation. It's a lens. And so it is, it's something I'm kind of rooted in and embodied in, is how I try to be. And then I try to practice that as, so it's, my heart hurts a little bit when people talk about like communication skills, because that feels so like surface level, and people are like, oh, well, nod and make eye contact and look right above people's forehead if you don't actually want, those kind of things that feel so like surface level. And I'm so interested in helping people develop a communication perspective as this orientation. And so there's a little bit of not a tension, but just I'm still curious and still exploring how to transform such rich theory and perspective into practice.
Well, I think that let's say my real training, my comes from reading Bateson, Gregory
Mhm.
Bateson. Okay. So the idea of context is a central idea
Mhm.
in relationship, social and interpersonal relationship. So one thing that I thought it was really new and opening, minds of CMM was introducing the idea of level of context of meanings.
Mhm.
Because until that point, communication was the pragmatic of communication, thinking between the difference of content and relationship. But it was okay. This is content, and this is relationship. You define a relationship, through context and communication. But the idea of the different level of context that CMM was proposing, and of course they said those were the levels, but it was more in the idea of having level of
Exactly.
context.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was not a reification of the levels. It was more, to me at least, it was more the idea that in the moment that we were talking to someone, we were constructing meanings through a complex process which involved different level of context. That could be the relationship, could be the cultural context, could be. And one thing, for example, I teach to my students when I teach CMM is the importance when we talk to clients to understand what is the level of context that from their point of view is most important in terms of, saying things to you. How do they make sense of what we are saying? And which is the perspective, because sometimes it could be the identities, sometimes it could be the cultural level, sometimes could be the relationship, sometimes could be the family myth or whatever. So the idea though that the people make sense and contribute to make sense from some point of view, which is the context of meaning of what they are doing and saying. Okay, so I think this was the most important idea I got from CMM, because in a way, CMM moved from a perspective of communication as something that I can say and read and explain to something where the interlocutor, the clients, bring in one point of view. And to understand what is the point of view of client is very important for the conversation to develop and coming to a share meaning. So for me, CMM was very important in this perspective, because as you understand what I said before about the difference in the perspective of the clinical practice, the therapeutic practice, based on, wandering on the process. And what I say about CMM all brings to one thing, that is therapy as an encounter between people that come from different perspectives, make sense from their own perspective, and while communicating, they share, they negotiate a new meaning, which is the meaning that will then make context for future communications. This to me is very important, because then when I do therapy, it's not what I say, it's not what they say, but it's what we are doing together in terms of negotiating meanings, which could be meanings of relationship, of identity, of social realities. And this to me is important, because as we know from communication and CMM especially, communication is an activity that negotiates meaning.
Hmm.
In this sense, communication can be created
Yes, yes,
because
yes.
it's a moment where you start from a certain point, and thanks to the interaction and the communication, you arrive to a new point, which will be then the context for
Hmm.
future communication.
Hmm. Hmm. And in those layers of context, I'm curious about the exact intersection or relationship or the way they play together of the CMM perspective rooted in social construction and being a systemic family therapist. Is it the family or the relationship is a system? I'm assuming it's both levels, but I'm curious
Yeah.
to hear how it works, that the family is a system, and also how are we understanding the relationship within the larger system of all these other contexts?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that a critique that I might move to CMM is that it's kind of, it offers a way to understand how communication works, but pointing on the individual, on how the individual makes sense.
Hmm.
Because the level of context, it's the level, my level of
Right,
context.
right.
You have your level of context.
Hmm.
And as I said, it's through, our interaction that we might define, what is that makes sense of what we are doing.
Hmm.
So, um, if we then apply this to family therapy, where we consider family as a system that
Hmm.
is interactive parts,
Yeah.
that, again, within which there are single individuals that share level of context or might not share level
Hmm.
of context.
Hmm.
So, for example, sometimes it's very interesting to see that the members of the family make sense of each other behaviors from completely different
Hmm.
perspective. What is considered from someone being an act of care could be considered from someone else as an act of control.
Hmm. Yes.
Okay. So, because they might start from a different perspective, one from the perspective of relationship, the other from the perspective of identity and independence, for
Mm.
example. So it's very important to have this, you know,
Hmm.
possibility to understand how each other participate in the relationship in order to help them to share one way, one perspective. So what if we take the perspective of control? What if we take the perspective of care? And see, how it works. So in a way, it helps to keep together the level of individual
Hmm.
and the level of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me and makes me want to go back to right at the beginning of this conversation. And this is just my interpretation of what happened. So I'd love to hear yours. But I think that you didn't like that I was using the word I so much when I was talking about. So that's when you said that's more relational. And I think that we hit on it right away that is such a like sticking point of all this, and what makes it so interesting, and that dissonance between I am an individual and I can control this individual. And I exist in my own mind. And so how do I act into a relational world, acting at both of those levels at the same time, kind of?
Yeah, because it's only by, keeping the relationship, so the system, if you want,
Hmm.
as the major point of view, that you can then understand also how the single points of view work together. Because one is, the way you understand the other. So you don't understand the meaning of one behavior if you don't see the feedback to that behavior.
Right.
Okay, so it's only but with the at the same time we might have different understanding of what is happening. But it's interesting to see how the different understandings then make them act in the relationship. And you move then from the relationship to the single perspective, to the actions and the behaviors, and again to how the people make sense of it, and how and when, if it is possible for the people to share a meaning.
I think that we're kind of stumbling into this framework that I know you've used to describe the intersection of your work of communication, interactions, and systems. Is this kind of, have we found our way there? What more would you want to say about the intersection of those three things?
Yes, I think that interaction is the key for this, because it is through action, through joint actions, that we understand, we can construct meaning. And this is the idea of social constructionism, that is through action that we construct meaning. But it is through interaction, actually. So it's not just otherwise we go back to individual.
Right.
Okay. If we put the single understanding, the single level of context, the single action at the center, we, move away from system and social. An action is always part of an interaction. And it is the interaction that, constructs the meaning and social reality. And when I say meaning, I say social realities, So what we are, what we, the kind of relationship we have, in what kind of world we are, we negotiate that through interaction. So if you take communication as interaction, which is the way I understand it, then you can say, through communication, you construct meaning. But if communication usually, has the meaning of talking, most of the time when people, say communication, think of people talking. While,
Right.
so underlying instead the interaction, we instead emphasize what we do together, in a more pragmatic way.
I really hold on to the language of better social worlds in CMM. I think that's really hopeful and a great thing for us to be thinking about. And my own understanding of that's evolved. Of originally that was kind of like a far off thing of what's the better social world we're working towards, but I've really come to change my understanding to be kind of like, what's the better social world of this moment? And I'm thinking about, I guess, language that's coming to my mind as we're talking about the challenge of being an individual in relational, interactions, co-constructing communication is the word invitation is coming to me, that I think that's a part maybe of the bridge between being an individual in these relational co-constructive spaces. I'm thinking about recently, I had a email exchange with a colleague of mine who we've really struggled with our communication in the past. We're not near each other. We communicate mostly over email, sometimes virtual meetings, and we just really miss each other every time. In terms of, I have felt some like hostility from this person is how I was making meaning out of it. And the past interaction we had, I finally said, I think I need to name this, because I really hate that kind of unspoken tension. I'm like, this is not doing anything for either of us. That's not what I want to make. So I kind of named that and invited this person to help me understand what they were intending because of the impact they're having on me. And they shared how they were storying our interaction. And I was able to respond to that with my CMM language and say, I'm realizing we're naming this episode very differently. I have a story that goes back years that is an origin of you excluding me from a project and not being collaborative. And so that's been influencing how I'm interacting with you. And you're naming this other moment where I was not maybe inviting collaboration. And that's how you're storying this. And just really understood that there was untold or unknown stories in this relationship. And so I, again, invited that person to share the story of how they relate to this kind of project we were working on. And they did. And that has absolutely transforms the way that I am able to interact with that person now. And so that's been a recent example that's so clear to me about how this communication perspective in CMM is something I can like embody and use. And the language is so great. And so I see that as being a real tool to that's why I explicitly use those words that, maybe you wouldn't do that in like a therapy setting, but with this other person who's familiar with CMM,
you do it.
I said, here's the episode and here's the unknown stories. And this has changed the way that we are able to interact now that I know some of these unknown stories.
Yeah, not necessarily using that language, but you do that in therapy a lot, even about the relationship with the therapist.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
sometimes, it can happen that you say, you know what I understanding is this, but I might not, be on the right
Yeah.
side. So could you explain me better? I understand when you say this, I understand that. Are we on the same, meaning here? I mean, you can do that.
Yeah.
But what I would like to underline is that you do that, and this is effective in a context where both person want to get along, to understand each other. I'm afraid I'm talking about the issue of power here. So if there is
Yeah.
an imbalance in the power relationship between the people,
Yeah.
I don't think that invitation is enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to talk about Trump,
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that is a kind of conversation that doesn't leave any possibility
Yes. Yes.
of having a story together, because he wants his stories to be this story.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what I'm saying, that is also social constructionism. Okay, it's not that social constructionism constructs positive
Right. Yes. Yeah.
realities.
Absolutely.
We construct also, and we do it through power relationship.
Yes.
So I think that we have to keep in mind that part, that is the part of oppression, the part of, wanting to overcome others. That, for example, could be on the side of a professional, not respecting, not respecting the other, person saying, I don't care. For example, what if your friends or colleague would say something like, I don't understand what you're saying.
Mhm. Yeah.
To me, everything is so clear. Refusing
Mhm.
the invitation to share
Mhm.
and negotiate,
Mhm.
Sometimes, for example, you have that in therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes you have that. You have people that are either, oppressed by the social system.
Mhm.
And when you offer some ideas, they say, no, this is impossible for me.
Mhm.
It's impossible because in my context that this, it can be, I have to obey. And so, what I'm saying
Mhm.
is that we need to address the issue of power
Mhm.
in relationship, power and communication.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'm so glad that you bring that up, and, like, that example I share is, like, the one, like, shining example I feel like I have, and that was, like, hard conversation, and it wasn't easy to kinda get this other person to, like, come
You know,
along with me, but
but
ultimately they did share the story, and so that I appreciate you bringing it back down to social construction is not just good, we've constructed something good together, it is what is happening, and so that's just
exactly.
invite you
This
into
is
that
what
lens.
is happening,
Yeah.
and that we possibly try to understand how each contributes
Mhm.
to what is happening.
Yeah, and I appreciate us zooming out so that we can see the whole picture of yes, CMM uses that language of we are active participants, and that's very like empowering. Step into this power that you do have to make choices about how you're what you are constructing, and you cannot talk about that without acknowledging all of the things that are outside of our control, like you're saying.
Exactly. And they are not only outside of our control, they are the result of
Mm.
a power
Yeah.
relationship, which preface someone deciding what
Yeah.
it is, someone else feeling
Yeah.
that doesn't have the possibility for. So sometimes, in these cases, more than inviting about a reflexive position within
Hmm.
the relationship is more to connect people to other, to empower them within
Hmm.
active situation outside of the interpersonal relationship.
Mm-hmm, yeah, yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. And the other language that I want to make sure that I hear from you about is I know you also use the language of the lived stories and the told stories,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I obviously like really stuck out to me when I first learned about CMM, and that's why it's the name of the podcast. And I'm just curious to know, as someone else who loves to use that language, how do you see that, or how do you use that distinction in the
Well,
work that you
well,
do?
I tell you, we used it, for example, this is not the only time, but it is the last time.
Hmm.
We used it, I say we because I work with other colleagues,
Hmm.
and we wrote an article for the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy,
Hmm.
and it's on press now. I mean, it has gone through the revision process. It is definitely accepted, just
Hmm.
it has to be published. And we use that for this particular issue that we addressed in the article. In Italy, it's a very strong Catholic country
Mhm.
in cultural terms, not in terms of people going to church
Right. Sure, sure, sure.
necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more in terms of what people believe, what they
Mhm.
think it's important, and so on. So
Yes.
usually, the idea of family in Italy, it's a very traditional image of family. Traditional in terms of heterosexual couple,
Mhm.
biological children, native,
Yes.
white, and so on.
Yes.
Of course, Italy, after, in the late, let's say, 50 years or so, Many things change. Also, the legislation changed, but very, very slowly. And always, not really there. For example, we don't have the recognition of the homosexual same-sex marriage, only a civil, commitment, which is not marriage.
Yes.
We don't have the recognition of a same-sex parenthood in Italy.
Wow, yeah.
There is a strong opposition against immigration. The people cannot, if you are not married in a heterosexual marriage, you cannot use the assisted medical procreation.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So, and because of this, though, many people, for example, divorce, we have the law of divorce, but divorce is considered very bad. If you divorce, you ruin your family, ruin your children, and so on. So actually, we have like two levels. What people live, people divorce, people go abroad for being inseminated with heterologous methodologies. People remarry after divorce, even if marriage is not very good. And on and on and on. So you have the lived story of the people that are based on diversity, on freedom, on the liberty to choose, of projecting, and on and on and on. And the story told. Divorce is bad, remarriage is bad. In Italy, there is this, in a family, only one mom and one dad. So, if you have
Yes, yes.
hang on. So what we see in therapy is exactly that. Families that have a gap between the story lived and the story told. And because of that, they live a situation and make choices according to the story told. Okay, so for example, the example we have in that article is of a family that of a remarried family, okay, remarried couple. The mother has two children from a previous relationship. When she divorced from her partner because he was an alcoholic, he disappeared. So she raised the two children. Then she met the new partner, and the new partner became a father for these children. All of a sudden, the biological father reappeared. Now, the oldest child said, I don't want to see him. I don't recognize him. I don't want to see him. The youngest said, I want to see him. The mother couldn't believe it. You want to see that person? He's awful. He did that. He was awful with us. He beat us up. He was, and on and on and on. And the child said, 12 years old, I want to see him. The father got court. That, of course, states the right for the father and child to meet. So the child meets. But meanwhile, the child drops on the scholar profit, how he is in school. Mother and the child fight all the time. Fight. The situation in the family is terrible. I see the couple, the new couple. And so when I ask to the partner, and what do you do to help in this situation? He said, Nothing. Because she said, now that his biological father is back, you stay out.
Mm.
And he said, I don't want, and I stay out because I don't want to make confusion for the child.
Mm.
So the idea there is only one father
Mm-hmm.
took them to a decision which actually was unhealthy for the family.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only resource there, the stepfather who could, because he said, I understand, the boy, I understand he wants to meet his father. I think that, we should kind of, but I don't say anything because I don't want to make confusion.
Mm.
So, they live a story and make
Yes.
decision according to a story told. So
Yes.
therapy in that case is to try to make the story told and the story lived coincide,
Mm.
And so, that's what I said, you need to, yes, you live the single mother family, you live the traditional family. Now you have to live a family with two fathers,
Mm.
and you have to learn to be that,
Yeah.
you know? And therapy is exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about it. Let's talk with the children. Let's talk with you, and so on. So this is an example of how we use story told, the story lived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time, the cultural level is behind
Mm-hmm.
the situation, the realities family live, in case of families, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Laura, that was such a great story. Thank you for mapping that all out for us. I think that's a really beautiful example.
I'll let you know the when the article comes out.
Yeah, please. Yeah. And I can link it here so people can read it as well. I
Yeah.
think people will be interested. That's, I'm, always struck by just the, as a lover of communication, of course, I love the language, which is not all of communication, but just the having the tool, having the language to name those two levels, I think on its own, again, is not
Oh, no,
everything, but
no.
opens up so much for people to understand that you don't have to be beholden to this told story.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
let's look
yeah.
at what you're living and what is, what is being constructed.
But
So,
also, you cannot avoid both
yeah,
level,
yes.
because I the way I understand it, the story told are the level of culture,
Yeah, yeah.
and not always, the social representation, the way people, but more than culture is the common sense, you
Hmm.
know, that is always, I say, conservative with
Yeah.
respect to something changing,
Hmm.
you first change and then you name what has changed.
Yeah.
So the people that find themselves in this process of where you have still a gap between the
Hmm.
common sense and the new realities, the point is exactly that they tend to make decision according to the common sense, which is not
Hmm.
what is needed
Hmm.
in what they are living in terms of changing things.
Yes. Yeah. Which of course makes me think of what I've understand to be like the shoulds of our lives are the like logical or moral forces that CMM
Yeah.
articulates, that those, just link right up with our told stories and
Sometimes,
yes.
I have this idea, which I cannot prove, of course, but I have the idea that we go back to actions.
Hmm.
The story lived are more advanced, more revolutionary than the story told.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think this is sometimes the problem.
Yes. Yeah. I know. I
Story told
absolutely
are
see
more,
that.
you know,
Hmm.
anchored to the past,
Yeah.
to the old language, and this while the story lived are, in the need of people.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Yeah. That's so beautiful. Laura, I think I could talk to you forever. As we kind of come to a close, I want to offer just one more chance. That was a great story to end on, but is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything we haven't talked about today? What do you want to leave us with?
There are so many things, of course, that,
Of course.
that nothing that I think. I like to actually finish with this idea of story told and story lived, because I think that can be a good lens, again,
Mhm.
not to be reified, but a good lens to read some situation of people.
Mhm.
Um, this to me is important because it gives you the opportunity of having lenses that are not necessarily pathological, but they are
Mhm.
just lenses that explain the process of change in society.
Mhm.
The It is by during coping with these changes in society that people might have some problems, you
Mhm.
know, in terms of not having the languages for what they are living, not having the support,
Mhm.
the collective support for what they are living. And I think this is a good way to keep in mind both the level as systemic, both the level of personal, interpersonal, and social level.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's making me think that we're both glasses wearers, so the metaphor of the lens really works for me
Yeah.
as something that, yes, I do, and I wear it all the time, but I can take it off, and what I'm looking at will look different, and neither is wrong. It's just the lens that I'm looking with.
Yes.
So, Laura, thank you so much for your time and your perspective and this just wonderful interaction today. I'm really, really happy with what we've
Thank you.
co-created here.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you very much.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.